dive right in. I'm Jerry Miller. I think most of us have met, and thank you so much in advance for judging the 3A or the 5A contest this weekend. Or if you're an executive secretary, if you're an area executive, thank you for joining us. And hopefully the information we provide to you tonight is just a refresher on the training that Mark and I did. And Mark McGahe's here. Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Great seeing everyone again, and looking forward to a great weekend starting now, and of course, going next weekend. And hope you enjoyed the training. Jerry and I really enjoyed putting it together, and so definitely a labor of love. So he's got some great information that'll kind of give you some nice refreshers for tonight's session too.
Awesome. And we are recording tonight. As far as an introduction goes, we're going to dive into about 8 or 10 minutes of just some familiarization things and a little bit of problem solving and housekeeping before we dive into the music sheet, the visual sheet, and then we'll wrap up with some talk of numbers management. I'm certainly willing, I don't want to speak for Mark, but I'm willing to stay on for a little while if I can help and support you with any questions you might have or any other resources we can send your way. But we're certainly excited to launch this. We do have Dr. Kent here as our special guest. I thought we might just kick it over to him here in the early stages for a short introduction on his part, and then we'll dive in after that. Dr. Kent.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I would like to start by saying thank you to all of you for your service as a judge. This process this weekend is extremely important to all these bands. As you know, we want to do the very best we can to give our bands the best possible evaluations, good feedback, good numbers management. Just can't emphasize that enough. I want to thank Mark and Jerry specifically for their work over the last seems like 20 years, but I guess it's been almost 4 now of getting us to this point, working collaboratively with UIL and TMAA to get here with these sheets. And we're just excited about this evaluation vehicle. We think it's going to be an improved evaluation for our bands, but I think it's also important for all of us to remember that the evaluation vehicle is only as effective as the way we use it as a judge. I would encourage all of you to approach your adjudication as if you've never done it before. Avoid thinking, I've done this. I've judged area. I'm one of the music judges. I'm one of the visual judges. I know how to do this. Try to act like I've never done this before. I think Jerry's approach is excellent in how he's going to prepare you to think about your evaluation of the bands, what language to use, and then, of course, points management. Use the rubric, use the scales that are provided for you. And then in the end, I think we're on our way to accomplishing the goal of providing improved evaluations from bands. So with that, turn it back over. And I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Kemp, for joining us tonight. So as we dive in, what I'd like for us to do is just kind of, I'm going to share my screen with you. If you have questions, we're going to pause. I think I've got 3 pauses in before the end to take any questions you want to ask verbally. But if you have a question that you want to just throw into the chat, and if Mark's talking, I'll answer it, and vice versa, we can bounce off each other, or we can come back to it as kind of a group question later. So we'll kind of use that as far as the process and the flow of the meeting. But Mark and I'll just kind of bounce back and forth. And with that, we're going to go ahead and share our screen and start talking through the presentation. Hopefully you can see that all okay. I'm going to go back up a few slides though for you, because I don't want to quite be here in the slideshow yet. And so what we're going to talk about first, and I've shared this in the deck if you're here, and I'll reshare it here in just a little bit, but there you go. You should be able to see that. So we're meeting with our area judges. Just as an introduction, I shared this in the chat earlier, but there is the 5-judge manual link. It's in the chat. It's on the UIL website. Every band director in Texas can see it right now. We worked, Mark and Brad and I, as well as several of our contributors, worked really hard to compile that manual. I know a lot of us like to have kind of a piece of paper the day of the contest. This is about a 20-something page document that outlines absolutely everything you would need. So please, if you haven't already, you can either download and print it. You can put it on your iPad or your device of choice and read through that there. Just 3 quick things about policies and ethics. The first is that our role as judges is to uphold the rules of the CNCR, that we're physically, mentally, and emotionally fit to judge, and that we're maintaining an ethical code of conduct before, during, and after. These are things that we cover in the TMAA region judge certifications, and certainly is a similar expectation for the UIL area and state levels. Second slide, that we honor all contracts, assignments, and duties as prescribed, that we promptly notify if there are any emergencies. I'm sure that you have your contest chairs contact information should anything come up, that you avoid fraternizing with competing directors. These are good reminders, administrators or school officials prior to and during the contest, and that we avoid discussing other judges and their decisions with directors and or school officials. So just being mindful of our role in terms of ethics and protecting the integrity of the system. Last, that we comply with standard practices of ethical conduct toward any students, colleagues, school officials, and community members. We respect and obey the law, demonstrate personal integrity, and that we uphold the intent of the adjudication practices, TEA, UIL, and TMAA rules. So with that, I'm going to just dive into some kind of simple daily big concept reminders here for the first 5 or so minutes. The adjudication of the group should be based solely on the performance of the day, not on the past reputation of the band or that band's director. We need to be consistent. Look, it's okay if we miss one, but we need to just start over and not cause the one that we missed to cascade into 12 that we missed. But if we miss one, just start over and we'll get back on track. And the good news is we'll talk about sheets and pulling numbers back later. But we would rather have one mistake than have one compounded into 15 or 20 at the end of the day. Please refrain from talking to other judges until you've marked your rating or your score for the band in this case. Just be mindful of that appearance to community members based on where you're seated in the stadium and whether they can see you or not, and just the appearance of you talking before a number.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yes, Mark, please.
Did you know, like, let's say you happen to notice band A gave them an 80. That could be, that 80 mean something different to the judge that's next to you. So don't all of a sudden try to match things up. It's your scale. We want you to follow the rubric, but again, in the neighborhoods that we're using, it may all of a sudden have a different meaning. So you follow your own plan, follow your own groupings along the way, and you manage your own numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing forward from there, using the rubric, as Mark just mentioned, and the placemat in your adjudication, justifying your score by the recording. We'll talk a little bit about that, but ideally, not that this would happen, but if a director got a hold of their recording before they saw the score, in listening to the recording, they should be able to ascertain, at least within 100 points out of 1,000, where they are. Write clearly and professionally so that your constructive comments can be understood. And as I always advise, write as if an administrator is going to read it. Let's say that group does in advance that thought they would, and the principal says, hey, let me see the sheets, and that they could read it, but also write it as if the students are going to read it, if they are advancing on or not, that the students have an understanding. And I know that's a tricky line to follow when you've got very little time from group to group. Justify the score you give by the comments you write. Address the descriptors on the comment sheets. I had a disgruntled young lady call me today about her program because the judge said they should rehearse better. And she said, how can they ascertain that we should be rehearsing better based on our performance at region marching? And we have to address the descriptors on the comment sheets, and nowhere in there does it say rehearsal etiquette or rehearsal procedures. Give the score that our comments describe by using scoring specific language. If we're saying consistently over and over again, then our score should be in that consistently range. If we're saying sometimes, then our score should be in that range. Please remember that as judges, we're guests of the region. We represent UIL. Many of us represent TMAA. That as far as the public is concerned, they think we work for UIL when we roll in. And so just kind of how we carry ourselves and how we act, I think, is just so very important to the importance of the event, I think. Keep your mobile phone device out of sight while judging. I mean, if you need it for a calculator or something, that's fine. But obviously, we don't want to be texting wildly in between groups or anything like that. Some big overarching. There is no official style for marching band in Texas. A military band that you might see this weekend, or a show band, or a corps style band, or a group that's doing military and corps style. There is no official style. You judge the group that comes on the field in front of you. We need to recognize, measure, and reward achievement. Speak to what's achieved. Speak to what you see that's great this weekend. And then if you see any discrepancies, just report it to the contest chairperson. Oftentimes that's our area executive secretaries. Don't try and run the contest, or I'm going to, hurt this group because they were over time, or they were, they mic'd 12 people rather than 10, whatever that might you can certainly bring those to the area executive, but it's not our role to have any of that impact scoring. remember that we are all, and as I looked at this list as you were all coming in, we're all teachers first and judges second. And our role and where we can really impact the most is to be great teachers. Everything we write and say should positively enrich these young people and their teachers. And our primary concern is the welfare and growth of these students. So Mark, do you want to add anything on that?
Oh, you're doing great. You get to the topics. You're good.
Before, during, and after judging, these are just a couple of environmental reminders. Many of you, and I look at your names, a lot of you have been judging over the course of this year already, but this could be your first assignment up, and that's fine if it is. Familiarize yourself with the venue. Are you in an indoor space? Is that like an indoor, like an enclosed kind of film deck where the bass is going to bounce around a lot? Are there going to be some acoustical problems? How's the weather? Is that going to impact intonation? Looks like we have beautiful weather this weekend over most of Texas, but still, is there going to be bleed through from the warm-up areas? That's a problem at some sites. Is crowd noise going to be an issue? Are you in the top row of the stands and the first set of moms is 2 rows in front of you with their pom-poms and their cowbells? Just kind of having an understanding of what those environmental challenges could be for you. Check your recorder, make sure that it works, always have, kind of a backup plan if that's grabbing your phone and recording or whatever you need to do, but just making sure you're prepared for that. Check the voice level so that you don't feel like you're having to shout, but also the band doesn't think you're shouting. So just kind of look at the VU meter, have somebody check it for you. If you're not sure, ask after the first band to the little runner, say, hey, can you ask him to check my recording? Was that level okay? Identify your name, that it's area prelims, area finals, define the area you're judging, music or visual. And I think it's really good for us to communicate field reference. I'm 35-yard line side 2. I'm right on the 50. I just think, again, that helps, especially in the day of electronics and you're judging music. You may be feeling like you're getting too much of something. Another judge may be feeling like they're not getting enough of something. So that field reference can be really useful for some of those groups that are, trying to maximize the blend of acoustic and electronic instruments. Couple more things here. The recorded and written commentary should be the accountability. It's constructive criticism, it's useful information. And additionally, the approach and the tone we use should be as helpful and geared for student listening and learning. Just a comment about judging the show through time. It's important that we judge the totality rather than just first impressions. It is easy, and we've all been there as band directors, to let the first 15 seconds or 30 seconds skew our view of the performance. If something's not right, just comment on it, make the note, and let's move on. If you need to revisit it later, that's fine, but let's not let it prevent us from ever talking to anyone else, just because one thing is too loud or too soft. Keep in mind that we are the only activity, not concert and sight reading, not solo and ensemble. We're the only one where we're giving recorded comments, and that's the sole basis for feedback. There are written comments, but really, honestly, we know the directors lean on our recordings. So our personality and preferences as reflected in our voice is as significant as what we're saying. So just doing our best to not sound offended, as our message can get lost. And ultimately, what we want to do is grow this activity in Texas. So how we say is as important as what we're going to say. Last thing on this, it's not easy to listen while talking. Mark and I were talking about this just the other day, letting the show come to you. Don't feel like you have to talk every second. Listen for a second and then react. Impression, analysis, comparison, like get an impression. But if you're always talking, it's sometimes hard to do that. And the judge says, oh, or the band director says, the judge talked over our whole thing. She never listened. He never listened. So I think the more that we just let the show come to us and react to it as it does, I think the better we're going to be. And we're going to have a better experience in the day. During the performance, keep your comments succinct and to the point. You could make some short notes about longer. Maybe you want to talk to them about articulation at the end. Maybe you want to talk to them about dynamic contrast at the end, but let's not do it in the flow of the show. Just make a little short note. And when you get to your wrap up, say, hey, I want to just talk to you for a minute about dynamic contrast. Because as we know, we don't have very long until the next group is coming up. I'm going to skip a couple of these because they're a little bit on the redundant side. Lastly, I just want to say when it comes to formulating a score, just be sure that it aligns with the appraisal. Think about echoing the words you just said in your head and hearing those come out, knowing where we are, and then using the placemat. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that in a second. We talked, I'm going to turn it to you, Mark, if you want to talk about some things in a second and reflecting on that. But one last thing is I compiled this. I was judging in Colorado this past weekend, and they had kind of a short list. And then I did another one recently in Oklahoma that had a little short list. I said, I'm going to just do a big list of some other words instead of just saying consistently over and over that you could say frequently. You could say mostly, you could say positive, you could say refined, reliable. I mean, there's a lot of just different words that center around in your vocabulary. You may feel like some of these words, like, oh, Jerry, that really goes over there. That's okay. But I just thought like to give you this list. I know for me, I'm judging down in Austin this weekend in 5A. And so I'm gonna have this list in front of me because I do sometimes feel like my vocabulary gets a little redundant being scoring specific. And hopefully if I see a group that's into box 5, I can use words like amazing, at all times, breathtaking, and brilliant. And you can hear yourself using those words, and that should align with some scores in that area. So hopefully that helps.
I think a way to plan that is, just even like if you have the luxury of having a group in front of you, let's say you're on the photo deck, having a hard copy of that, like having the placemat turned over to the back of the sheet, sometimes will give you the information you need. Of course, you're going to be looking and listening to the ensemble, but where it's kind of just down there. So as you're looking for a word, you're seeing the category, and your eyes will hone in on, okay, I want to say something other than consistently. There it is, gratifying, and just have it as a quick reference. So maybe just a simple sheet that's on a clipboard in front of you would be great to have as you're pointing, see if it helps you get through the day.
Yeah, it's great advice, Mark. I think that's something that can really help us all grow going forward. The only thing I wanted to mention really quickly on ethics, and we do a larger piece on this with the TMAA training, is just the social media thing this weekend. A-okay for us to post a picture judging with our buddies or my office for the day and a picture of the field, but let's just be sure we're not naming groups. And to say XYZ high school was incredible this week, like it feels like, again, the impression is that we work for UIL when we do these things. And if we're posting about a group that we thought was particularly favorable, I just don't think that goes well for us. So just from a social media perspective, totally okay to post where you are, that you're with your friends judging, that, awesome bands from area B, all that wonderful. But let's just stay away from naming groups and things like that. I want to dive into philosophy, and this will be kind of lead us right into the music sheet, but each sheet is about what and how, and we've talked about this a lot in our trainings. There are no pure captions. We understand that nothing exists in isolation, but the performance of the students is of critical importance. When they walk on the field, every single program begins with an equal opportunity for success. Every program walks on the field with an equal opportunity to wow you, to amaze you, to be brilliant. The strengths and weaknesses are going to be measured from the start all the way to its conclusion. And any summary should, when we get to our wrap up, reflect on some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses. And I'll tell you, sometimes that's hard to get to the end and find those strengths with a group that was particularly challenging. But even if it's just some small things, let's talk about a couple of strengths. Listening and watching the band over the length of the show needs to offer a seamless look as well at that relationship between music and visual. I'd love to say you're just judging music, you can close your eyes, but that you need to see a little bit of not just what and how, but why something went wrong. What made that challenging, or why did that not line up? Because your teacher brain is going to do that anyway. So I do think that that's there. Same thing with the visual. When you're judging visual over on the music side, if you hear something and you realize it's out of time and it triggers you to see feet out of time. And again, we know that those things feed into each other. We know what our caption is, but still, understanding that and the marriage between those two is critical. Remember too, that these directors and these designers are not playing off the prescribed music list. They are selecting this program. They chose these notes, they chose these rhythms, they chose this drill, or somebody chose it for them with their approval, but they've chosen this. And if it's not successful, then we can either talk about the content side. This music was too hard, and you're never too old to overprogram. Like, we've all been there. The flip side of that, though, is if you feel like the training isn't there, in other words, the music was appropriate, but the training wasn't there, then that, I think, is a different conversation on the what and the how. Is you're talking less about what's being asked of the performers to play and more about just what their fundamental skill set is leading in when it comes to tone production or articulation. Our major objective is to understand that performers work not only to bring a performance to the audience, but also to bring precision. So it's not just about the most exciting, the highest, the loudest, the fastest either. It needs to be about something that's very precise. And I think Texas prides itself on that. I think that's one of the hallmarks of our marching bands. Mark, you want to add anything before we talk what and how?
Oh, sorry, you're doing great.
Okay. As far as the areas of what and how, ideally, we're going to say what first and follow it by how. We should avoid spending too much language on how, because then directors think, well, they didn't. And we've all been there, right? As a band director, you got that recording, they got that tape from the judge. He didn't realize we were in the key of concert D flat. he didn't realize that the tempo is 180 right here. So, I mean, when you say, hey, this key center is very challenging, in this challenging key center, we're struggling for intonation. Or if you were to say, at this tempo, I'm noticing that we're having trouble getting our feet in time, we've acknowledged the what at this tempo. You've chosen this tempo. So I think it just gives our recordings a lot of validity, and it only takes 4 or 5 words. And I think that helps them know, like, hey, he understood the show, she understood the show. It just, they commented on what they saw. We should as well avoid spending too much language on what, because then they feel like we're trying to rewrite their show. And especially a group that's advancing on, and we're going, well, this solo here is just not right, and I would move this to here. And like, we don't want to be in the business of rewriting the show. They've made, at this point, it's area. They've made the choices. This is what they want to present to us. So we just need to judge what they show us. The intent on those bullet points across the front that you're so familiar with is to provide an overview. And of course, that continues on the back with the questions. And we'll get to those here in a moment. Judges should be referring to and reflecting on as many of these questions as possible during the adjudication process. Now, it's important to say that one or more of those bullet points could become more important to you over the course of time. Could be a balance issue. That's a common one on area day. Could be some of those things. So just be mindful of, one thing can become important, but aim to be balanced. If you feel like you're spending a lot of time with the percussion, let's move on. Like I've been with the percussion for, it feels like a solid minute of a 7-8 minute show. Let's get on to something else. So just kind of be mindful that we can all get trapped. And I mean, we've been there as band directors, and certainly can be there as judges as well. But begin every band with the same approach, the same mindset that they're going to be successful. And know that every band's going to have different strengths and weaknesses. What we want to give is an approach that is balanced between what and how amongst all the components on the front of the sheet. I'm going to talk about color guard a little later, so I'm just going to skip over these slides, but I do have a page in the training document when you're on visual that allows you to talk pretty deeply about and gives you some ideas when it comes to color guard. So with that, let's dive into the area music sheet. First off, you've all seen the new sheets, the front and the back. There's samples of them in that document that I shared. I don't want to delve too deeply into this, and I've shared this slide in the slide deck, and I'll share it again here in a moment. But these are the old, if you look, the region sheets into area. This is what the groups qualified on at region. Everything they saw in region music, it ends up in the area sheet. So there's all of these descriptors for these bands. There shouldn't be anything new or any surprises here. In fact, if you like the old sheets, I've connected them for you here, but you can see where even off of the old sheets here, it says old above them, where everything moves across. In fact, the only thing we took out was intonation and percussion, because unless we're talking to the timpanist, I don't know what we're talking about. So, and so few groups are using timpani anymore anyway. So, that was really the only thing that went away in the top part of it. As well, you can see in the old ensemble thing, pretty much everything got looped in. We took it from about 31 descriptors down to about 16. So you're just circling a lot less. Now, on the content side, at the very bottom box, both in music and on the visual sheet, is the only place you're going to see some different stuff. The different things you see is there's one that's called content with respect to challenge and continuity and flow. Those were not on the region sheet. What is content with respect to challenge? Is this show challenging? If a group comes on the field and plays, a 5A group and plays the equivalent of a grade 2 band piece, that may not be content that you feel is challenging for a 5A marching band. By the same, the continuity and flow pacing, if they do a 5-minute ballad, I want you to be able to say, like, hey guys, from a design choice, a 5-minute ballad, while beautiful, a great rendition of Nessun Dorma, went on for quite a while. And I would like to have seen some more technical skills, some more marching, some more things of that nature. So again, those show up in both the content side of music and a visual. So again, you can see the front of the sheets starts with ensemble, and you're talking about things that you're very confident about: phrasing and artistic expression, blend and balance, precision and timing, dynamic contrast, style and articulation, and effective use. And I want you to think, as you're judging, like, we're going to look at this bottom box here, which is the back of the sheet. If you had to answer these questions and put a tick mark on this line, where would you put the tick mark? So let's say we're listening to the XYZ high school band, and we say, to what degree do the performers demonstrate phrasing and artistic expression that is of the highest musical value? And you go, well, it's not quite consistently, it's right under that. I'm going to put a tick around 170, tick there. All right. You don't have to do this. This is a mental exercise. Blend and balance that's clear and appropriate. You know what? They were really well balanced. I'm going to put it consistently over there. I don't feel like it's about a 180. So, you could see if you started doing that in your head, you will very quickly those numbers will start to come together and you will arrive at your score for this box pretty easily. So again, you don't have to actually physically put the tick marks in. I don't think I would. It's more of just a mental exercise for you that I think can be really helpful with these placemats. The woodwind and the brass ones are exactly the same. They have tone quality, intonation, technique and accuracy, and blend and balance. And again, you can use the questions, or you can just, the questions are just extrapolated from the descriptor. So to what degree do the performers have appropriate characteristic tone quality? You can say always. That may happen if you're seeing a super upper end group this week. You may have an always. I doubt it, but you could. You may definitely see some consistencies. Gosh, I hope you don't see a lot of rarelies this weekend. You may, but I really hope that you're not. It's the very small portion of scores down there, but I hope you're not seeing those. The brass one looks exactly the same. The percussion one looks the same, except we took out intonation and we added precision and timing. That's not to say that precision and timing isn't on the brass sheet. If I go up, you see it's just technique and accuracy. But with percussion, it has technique and accuracy, but also added precision and timing. So you can talk about the percussion section and how the timing relates to itself. How the front ensemble relates to the battery and vice versa, how the snares relate to the basses, all of those things. So again, that sheet is those three boxes for when you're judging music are all very, very similar. And then last is that content box that we talked about from region. It pulls through with the exception of that respected challenge. And it looks like this. And this is the newer box. Remember, 850 of your 1,000 points are going to be very similar to the old box. This content box has some older things on it, but let's just spend a little more time here than we did on the others. Effective utilization of all performers. Did everybody play, or did you never hear the woodwinds? Were the woodwinds just, they never had a role? Did you never hear the low brass? Did the percussion, were they buried on the 50-yard line playing pianissimo the whole time? How about clear musical reinforcement of the visual content? Did the music, when the music was big, did the visual feel big? When the music was small, did it match? How about suitable musical content for the performers? We used to call this demand of music on the old sheet. Is it appropriate? Is it too much? Is it usually appropriate? Is it consistently appropriate? Was it always appropriate today? How about musical repertoire while contributing to visual? Did everything they ever played that was good, they were standing still on the 50-yard line? I think we have to start having those conversations with our bands. Content that challenges the performers, and is there a sense of flow and pacing, which is logical and artistic? I had a judge ask me about flow and pacing the other day, and I said, I think about concert band pieces. What concert band pieces do you love that are Overture to Candide is incredibly well paced. When you think about it, there's not a theme in there, in my opinion, that goes on for too long. Everything moves really nicely. Could you think of a concert band piece that's poor? Let's not say it in here, but you could think of some where you're like, man, that slow section. I could think of I'll do one, the Giannini, the symphony, like that second movement. It never really set for me as a pacing thing. It always went on a little too long. So is there a marching band version of that? This thing just didn't flow. It went on for too long, or it was great and you only did it once. And I felt like we could have all done it better. So that's one I think that's maybe given folks a little bit of, gee, I'm not sure how to talk about this, but I think fall back on your concert band knowledge as a music judge and go, would I play that piece if it were on the PML? Is it paced well? Did it feel right to the kids? Mark, anything you want to add?
Plays the Giannini Symphony and you like it, go with it. Okay, in spite of what Jerry says there. Jerry, you may want to address something about miking a little bit later, but if not, would this be a good time for us to talk about amplification?
Yeah, actually, we can do it right now. So in the manual, I have a little thing about how we listen to groups. And when it comes to amplification. So there are essentially 4 layers you're going to listen to. The first is however they mic their percussion, the marimbas and the vibraphones. That's, the 2D miking of the front ensemble. The second one is you want to listen to miking of like special effects, soundscapes, things of that nature. The third thing is small ensembles. It's important in the small ensemble in that we listen not just for clarity, but do you hear inflection? Do you hear, like I see Mr. Klett on our call, if he were judging like solo and ensemble contests and I put a woodwind quintet in front of him, he would talk to them about clarity of voice. He would talk to them about aligning articulation. I think when you see that soli and it's well mic'd, I think that you can dig in pretty deep like a solo and ensemble judge to say, boy, I'm really having trouble hearing that Barry sax in the quartet. Would love for that color to come through more. There's not a lot of dynamic shaping to it. Lastly, the solo, which you're definitely going to hear from a lot of groups, not just do I hear that it's a trumpet. Do I hear, I think I used a flugelhorn in my example. Do I hear that it's a flugelhorn? Well, sure. But do I actually hear the inflection? Do I hear the articulation? Again, if the student were sitting in front of me at a solo contest and I were judging him or her, is it a class 1 solo with first division expression? Because it should be if they've stopped the whole marching show to feature this child. So just be sure. And I mean, again, we want to be positive, just like we are at solo and ensemble, but just kind of in your thoughts about that, how you can best talk about the miking. I don't feel like we're in the infancy of electronics anymore. I think that it should be, Ronnie Rios said it in our training that we did back in September, it should be state of the art. It should be incredibly high quality. It should be studio quality. You can produce studio quality for very little money nowadays. So we should go in on that, especially if they're trying to get to state in 3A or 5A. It needs to be pretty high end. So I want to talk briefly. I had another one of you email me about, you said you and Mark talked about environmental challenges. Can you tell me some more? I gave you 2 graphics and they're in the manual as well. When we think about environmental challenges, this is like the band director brain where we say what, this low brass feature isn't exactly together. That was the how. And maybe we could even ask the why especially if it's a real good group, there may be an environmental challenge. So on the left side, you see the battery percussion and the low brass are right in front of them. Batteries on the 50, low brass are on the 45. That should come together real well as the time passes or they play together. Look at my second graphic where the battery's on the 50 and the low brass are over on the 10. That's as all of you have taught marching band, that is a very different environment. And so if that doesn't go well, you can put on your teacher brain, do your what and your how, but also say why and say, guys, I think that this moment may not have come together the way you wanted to because of the staging. The low brass are, 50 yards away from the battery here. And that was, a problem. By the same though, if they pull this off, then I think that that they deserve some credit from us. And that sometimes is hard to watch for, but if you see something that's like that, certainly we want to credit that. And I think it goes a long way for us as judges when they're like, wow, they noticed that environmental challenge that we put them in. And sometimes they do that for visual reasons. Sometimes it's for a soloist. Sometimes it's for a prop. There's lots of reasons why, but just to put that into your brain. Anything else on those, Mark, about music?
No, I think it's huge. I mean, it is like you said, you're kind of caught up in the moment. You're maybe catch yourself later, maybe in your recap, you could say, oh yeah, by the way, I did notice the challenge you put the students in there and they really excelled today towards that. And again, give it up for them if you feel like it was well-deserved.
Yeah, absolutely. I just dropped back for a few of you who joined us, the 2 documents, the slide deck that we're looking at, as well as the 5-judge manual that I've referenced a couple times. So I haven't seen any questions in the chat. If you want to post something there, please do. I totally don't mind. You can, I'll tell you what I tell my students. If you post it publicly, I'll answer it by your name. If you post it, you can send it privately to me. I'll just say someone in the group wanted to know and I won't use your name. So that way, I don't want you to be embarrassed to ask any question that you have. I want to make sure you walk out of this feeling good. We are about halfway through the time and we're actually over halfway on the content. So we're going to be good to finish up a little early. And we'll stay here certainly for questions. Let's talk about visual in the front and the back of the sheet. Again, the old sheets used to use some terms like carriage and uniformity and instep and all those things. Everything made its way over, just worded a little differently, like control of form and interval. Whereas it used to say things like step off and halts, pivots, turns, facings. Now that's control of body. Control of equipment is where carriage used to be. So, I don't want you to feel like we ripped out your language that we've all become accustomed to. It's there. There is one new descriptor, poise, presence, and communication. What does that mean? And I defined it in the manual for you, but we all know what professionalism looks like when we see it. When a color guard member drops her flag, that she picks it up in a way where the recovery is very professional. That the group just carries themselves on, from the moment that the time starts till the moment it's over, they feel connected with the audience, connected with one another, connected with the press box, You feel like when the soloist finishes, he rips the trumpet off his face and looks right at you. It has that something special about it when it comes to that level of communication and presence on the field. So that is one of the things that's new inside of it. Over here on the old sheets to the new sheets, you can see we're talking about uniformity of style and professionalism. And we'll get to all this in a second when I slow down into the real ones. And then on the old sheets, you can see where everything kind of connects through. We did not keep appearance of uniforms in there, as that seems to be an ever moving target. So on the individual, you have basically 3 areas you're going to look at in the visual sheet. There are 300 points, 400 points, and 300 points. The individual movement, which is how do the individual students march? I would start with this one personally, but you can zoom out if you like. I tend to start here. I tend to start in and I watch 5 trumpet players march. I watch the bass drum line march. I watch the tubas march, and I make comments as far as how individually they're handling the content. We're not here to say that everybody in Texas should march straight leg, or that they should have, relaxed knee, or that none of those things are our purview. Does it match? Looking at the individuals, is the training there? Do they match? So you can see things like the second question there: to what degree do the performers demonstrate depth of training resulting in a clear, uniform approach to the control of their bodies? And you could say it's consistent, or it's usually. And again, that's where you can ascertain where those point values are. Recovery is always very important. That area, we're certainly going to see recovery, and we want to see quality recovery from the students that is professional. Again, kind of moving region into area, it all crosses over well, but this is what the second box, this is a 400-point box on the visual sheet, and it's all about ensemble movement. So now we zoom out, right? We take more of a 30,000-foot view, and we say, how is there a refined sense of achievement with regard to the form control, the intervals between? Now, we could just look at our 5 individual performers and see that, but this is more looking at the entire woodwind section, the entire brass section, or the entire band in some cases. How about a depth of training with a uniform approach to style across the band? Or do the trumpets march a little differently than the clarinets? And is that something that we need to talk about? And obviously, recovery effort in there. The content box is, the one that I think is the one that we pay attention to a little closer. Remember that I mentioned in the music that 150 of the 1,000 points were devoted to content. Here on the visual side, it's a little bit higher. It's 300 points. Remember that with music content, there's still source material and things that tie it a little tighter, but with visual content, as those of you who have written your own drill, it's a blank page, and that's an intimidating thing. And these bands have made a lot of choices. And so it's our opportunity to talk about the choices they've made. So we can ask, to what degree does the content demonstrate effective utilization of all the performers, or appropriate visual reinforcement of the music? In other words, does the audio match the video? Does the video match the audio in this case? How about suitable visual content? Are they asking their tubas to jazz run for 20 yards while playing? Is it suitable to the group? How about, is there a sense of flow and pacing that's logical? And I know you're like, well, Jerry, we talked about in a concert band piece, but I think visually it's the same thing. Does the group present the same looks over and over again? Or are you seeing some different views? They bring the woodwinds down in front. They bring the brass down in front when they're featured. The color guards in front for something. It's not the same look all the time, but there's a good sense of flow and pacing, and every kid gets their turn, so to speak, on center stage. And that there's a coordination that is artistic, that it feels like flowing music is flowing drill, and blockier style music is, or if they want a juxtaposition, that's fine too. But I think those are all things to talk about. So,
Gary,
yes, go ahead, please.
I think all of us are trained in music, and very few of us are trained in the visual movement, and so you're real intimidated by this, including myself in a lot of ways. It's okay to not know the official terms of everything, but I do think you addressing it again. So if you're talking about the what, you're kind of giving some examples along the way that let's say it's a contemporary movement style, and really what you're evaluating is to what degree is it done. And here's some examples I wrote down of what you could say. The extended leg needs to be uniform in that pose. When the trumpets tilt their upper bodies, everybody in the section needs to be tilted the same way. When you're moving across the field in that smoother step, all guard members need to hit with the same part of their foot. You may not know the term plie, and that's okay, or they're hitting with the platform of their foot, but you're looking for, again, a comparison, and it looks like they're all choosing to do a certain style, or the majority of them are. So again, kind of allude to it. Yeah, I recognize this thing where it causes it to be not vertical, and I'm going to go ahead and address that. In several of our contemporary groups, the term I like to use that I've caught on is certain groups will produce a moment. And that means they've chosen some way to make it more than just kind of standing still. Recognize that if they're choosing to play their instruments while they're doing like a lower body choreography versus someone who's going to hold a pose versus someone that's just going to stand up. And let's say all three groups play at the same level of excellence. One group has chosen to do a few more things. Now, just because you move a lot doesn't mean you're going to get points, but it can be, oh, you've taken some risks and those risks are paying off, or because of the risks, that's causing your music not to be together or causing some timing issues. So again, just recognize there's different presentations and certain levels that groups are choosing to present to you at different times in their show.
Yeah, really good point, Mark. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's just, I think let's not be intimidated. Just like I think musically they're going to play some pieces we don't know too. Like it doesn't mean that concert F isn't concert F, So I mean, I think going after the things we know is going to help make us stronger. I want to spend just about 5 minutes here with the delineated scale. It's really important that the scoring system for both area and state has uniform meaning. I know that we rely on ranks. I get it, but I don't want us to get sucked into the idea that our number doesn't matter. Our number needs to have meaning to these groups. If they score an 865 out of 1,000, or in the case of the box in front of you, if they score a 250, then they should know that they're trending toward being consistent. If they score a 150 in that box, then they should know that they were down in the middle of usually. Again, I know that it's never going to be absolutely perfect, but I also don't want us to think, oh, well, it's the ranks are the only thing that matters. You're right, for the scoring and the result, it does, but the feedback to those directors and those kids, I think the more that we can have the language be relevant and have uniform meaning, I think is really, really important. The performance conditions can vary over the course of the day. I think back to when I judged probably 10 or 12 years ago at an area contest, and it was freezing in the morning. Like there was ice on the field. It was so cold. And the first group of the day was a good group, but boy, did they struggle with intonation. Whereas, by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was probably 68 degrees and very reasonable. So, just kind of be sensitive to the challenges of the group over the course of the day. And I know that's hard to predict in these environments. Lastly, on the 5 boxes, remember that everything's divided into thirds. So you really have like 15 boxes to choose from. So, I jokingly say, were they consistently consistent? Were they always consistent? Were they usually consistent? So you can see how I can break up the consistently box by using the words on either sides of it, So just kind of by doing that, you can hopefully help yourself find your groove for the day inside of these sheets. The proper application also is important to know standards over time. And many of you, as I look through this, have had phenomenal groups over the years, and you know exactly what the standards are for a 5A or a 3A marching band that you're going to see. These words that we attach, I think, can help guide us to that standard. And, match the description, compare it to our standard, and decide where we want to be, lower third, upper third, or right in the middle of the box. So I go back to this, and this kind of leads into it. Impression, analysis, and comparison. Now, we do this big over the course of the show. We get an impression of the group within the first minute or so. We spend our time analyzing the performance. And then as they exit the field, we begin comparing them to other groups. And we go, well, that was better than group A, but not quite as good as group B was, right? So we use impression, analysis, comparison to arrive at that. But we also do this in a small way in every moment of the show. So they have a woodwind feature. We get an impression of it. Okay. We analyze it. Well, the saxes were this and the flutes that, and then we compare it later on to other groups' woodwind moments. And kind of that's how we're arriving at that score over the course of the day. So the additional tools we have for area with impression, analysis, comparison. So we have that numerical scale that I've shown you. We can use the thirds in the boxes. We add our subcaption scores to arrive at your final score. It's important that we don't go to a final score first and then try and make the numbers add up. Just slot them where they are. And you might end up with some real strange numbers. You might have an 841 for a group. You might, you may have some things that are like that, but get the numbers where you feel like they're going to be, and be as honest as you can with those groups. I won't go too deep into this. It's in the manual, but it talks about the lower third of a box is emergence. They're just coming into that, right? They're just getting to that point where they're emerging into that box. And I've given you some bullet points. And again, it's in the manual that I linked there. The middle third is realization. They're in the center of consistently. They're in the center of usually, and you can talk to them about that. And then finally, fulfillment is they're at the upper end of consistently. They're the best groups you're going to see this weekend are likely going to be at the upper end of consistently, beginning to make their way into some of those always boxes for you. So just kind of thinking through that as a layer inside of those thirds and how they link. And so here's what I was talking about earlier, and I put a full page example of this in the manual. It goes through all of it. I just kind of cut it off here to show you a little, but here's a judge on individual movement. And she said, control of form interval. As the woodwinds set up these large ranks and files on side 2, the performers consistently halt in well-defined cover downs with a few noted exceptions. And so you can see control of form. They locked it in at the bottom of consistently. Okay, again, you don't have to draw these arrows, but I'll tell you with my head, this is what I'm doing. I'm just kind of putting little mental tick marks as I watch the show. Or larger step sizes. The trumpets usually maintain strong body lines, but it is not yet consistent throughout the entire section. And so I went into the top of box 3 with that red mark. Or equipment. The individual performers in the guard consistently handle flag work during the accelerando with a few minor flaws, and I put that toward the bottom of box 4, right? So a lot of times our language almost leads us into these little arrow ideas, and you can see once I combined all of these, and I have a full sheet of it in the manual, I was like, oh, that's about a 212, and 212 is, I think you can see my cursor is right about where my cursor is. It's right in this kind of where the big block of arrows ended up. I want to talk to you about setting tolerances, and this is important. This year, we're going to be meeting tomorrow morning with the area executives, and we're talking about outliers. If the numbers have meaning, we want to protect you. I don't want your name on the yellow board. I don't want your name on Facebook. I don't want your name being dragged through the mud because of some. So we've asked, and we're going to talk with our area executives tomorrow about just some techniques to use to watch for that outlier, and to just come up to you. And I wrote a sample script here of what you might hear, something along the lines of, in reviewing your bottom line total for XYZ high school, I wanted to let you know that your score is an outlier from the other 2 music judges, let's say. I'm not asking you to change it, but just to ensure that you feel confident the score earned by the ensemble and that all of the subcaptions still feel valid after you watch a few more groups or after you have watched a few more groups. Our aim here for area executives and for contest staff is to protect you as a judge, because I feel like we need to offer you that layer of protection so that if Mark and I are scoring a group and I have 825 and he has 850 and you have 650, that somebody might just say, hey, just so you're aware, they're not going to tell you what our scores are, but just to say you're an outlier. And maybe 5 or 6 groups later, you go, yeah, you know what? I got really aggravated at, a particular thing early on, and I couldn't get past it. Now that I've seen 5 or 6 more groups, and while we're not publicly saying this, and I know that the Dr. Kent will, back us up on this, you are welcome to change any number at any time. Up until the recap comes out, obviously, up until the contest is over. But, if you realize 4 bands in that you've really struggled, reach out to that area executive and say, hey, can I see for ABC high school, would you mind, could I see my sheet one more time? I feel like I need to make a change on that now that I've seen some more. Don't feel like I said earlier, you don't want to compound mistakes. Please reach out. I would so much rather you feel like you made the best call ever than that you have to regret something, or, you go home thinking like, boy, I really missed on that group. So just know that we're adding that additional layer of protection. It's always been there at the state marching band contest, but we're extending that down into area a little bit just to try and protect our judges and their role in the day. Numerical scale, I have a tote sheet that's at the bottom of that. I also have, if you are a more tech savvy person, I have a link at the bottom of the very last page of the document that takes you to a Google Doc I created that you can copy or download as an Excel file. And if you want to do it digitally, which I've been doing it the last few weekends, it actually, when you type in the score, it auto ranks the group for you. So it'll tell you what rank they're in automatically. And all you have to do is type in the names of the bands in performance order. But it is nice to have. I've been using it probably a couple, 2-3 years now. And so I really like it. So I made it. If you want to do that, if you're a paper tote sheet guy, no worry. I heard from a few area execs that this is kind of small. So I have a 2-page version and a 1-page version, and I'll share that with all of them tomorrow. I'll also email it to all of you. So if you want to print a 2-page version that's a little more spread out, because I agree the 1,000 numbers on 1 page is pretty cozy.
Jerry, I'm assuming, can you go back to that previous slide?
Yes, sir.
I'm assuming your colors are coordinated with the box and thirds.
Yes, you can see box 5 at the top. I don't know how clear it is to everybody else, but it goes green, yellow, red. And then box 4 is a bigger box, right? Green, yellow, red. Box 3 is a huge box, green, yellow, red. Box 2 gets a little smaller, and box 1 is small again. So if you want to think about your thirds, you can print it in color and do green, yellow, red. And again, the one I emailed to you tomorrow will have the same colors on it so that you can utilize that. But yeah, so just a good way to kind of keep track of your numbers. I don't want to go too deeply into the value of a tenth today, except that as you're judging tomorrow, boy, it would be great if or on Saturday, if your scores have meaning. In other words, if one group is ahead of another group by 20 points, and then another group is behind them, that those 20 points have some sense of meaning. And I know that's tricky to do, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to set you up well on the day to think about what that meaning is and kind of how all of that flows. So I want to pause. I've got 2 questions that came through in the chat privately, so I'll just answer them for the group. I'll stop sharing for a minute as well. One of the questions was about the amplification piece, where the soloist is tremendous. They're very, very good. But against the ensemble, they're either, well, if you think they're tremendous, they're probably way too loud. How do I talk about that? I think that we have to address as a music judge the quality of the solo and acknowledge the flugelhorn player for being the, fantastic musician that she is. But then also we have to be confident to say, set against this backdrop, you're about, I tend to use percentages, 20% stronger than I would like you to be. Because here's the thing, if it's a real good group and you're going to see them again in finals, perhaps, they can adjust that. I mean, most of these guys are pretty savvy, and they can go, oh, all 3 of the music judges said that the flugelhorn was way too loud. We got to bring that down. And you know that stadium dynamics are tricky. Some stadiums are, real I think about Duncanville. Duncanville's a real bassy stadium here in the DFW area. But then I also have been in stadiums where it's real pingy and real tight. So it's something to think about. I love another comment, and Mr. Vaughn just posted it to everyone, so I'll go ahead and answer it to him. When we only hear the woodwinds play for 30 seconds, and I would ask, does it sound like a concert band piece? What if we were judging concert and sight reading, and we were judging the aforementioned Giannini Symphony, and we only ever heard the woodwinds when they had exposures, but we never heard them blended with the brass? I think we need to hear woodwinds blended with brass. And I think that the best groups, and I think when Andy Seeley did his presentation on the clinic, we referenced this, is that the best groups, Andy's group's a great example, where you can hear the woodwinds and the brass. It's a really good relationship between those colors, and you can hear that coming through very often. But I agree, there is that sense of, I just pull the woodwinds forward for 30 seconds, they play their little ditty, and then they go back to the back of the field again. I think those days are gone. I think we need to encourage the groups to bring their woodwinds up as often as they bring their brass up, as often as they bring their percussion. So from a content perspective, there's a conversation there. But I also think from an achievement perspective, to ask for more sound production from the woodwinds, I think is very appropriate. So I agree with you. And I've seen it a few times in the last couple of weeks judging, where they just have the one woodwind moment and then it's over. And you're like, okay. I mean, I can try and give you 300 points for 30 seconds, but boy, is that hard to do. I want to hear your woodwinds play more often. So it's certainly
another great example is would the band on the field survive if the woodwinds weren't present? Or would it survive if the front ensemble wasn't present? You want it to be where, like, hey, no, it's reliant. This moment is reliant on these moments, whether it be blended together or they're linking or maybe sending different passages through to each part of the ensemble. You want it to be, again, we're using all the crayons in the box, right? We're not just using the same 3 crayons over and over. hopefully you can credit those groups that are attempting to do that.
Yeah. I wanted to go back on a point, and Mark and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, like the contest dynamics too. We talked about how the temperature can change over the day and how just those circumstances too, but also just be mindful that later groups in the day aren't creeping to the top of your recap. Because this is a random draw contest. It's not like the best groups from the region got the last spots at area. And, a lot of us have been judging invitational contests where there may be the bands are blocked in by how they did last year, or they're blocked in by classification. So there's that natural flow where the contest gets better. Area might be the first, it is for me this year, the first contest I've judged where there are points involved, where the groups are completely random. The other 3 events I've judged this season have all had the groups in some type of either classification order or rank order from the previous year. And so, there's that tendency to crescendo our number to the back of the day, to borrow that term. But just be mindful that the best group of the day might be first. The best group of the day might be second. And we have to overcome that. And it's one of the biggest challenges, I think, of judging area, is that it is completely random draw. And so there's not any little buffer to try and help us or kind of guidepost to try and mark our way on that. So just something to be thinking about as you're getting into the day. I think that I covered, Mark, was there anything else that we needed to talk about getting into this weekend?
No, nothing I can think of it. On your last point, as I was thinking, let's say it's in a prelim situation, there'd be 10 groups in finals. You definitely want to try to get the right 10 groups in finals. So make sure you keep checking your notes and your numbers. Look very closely at the 9, 10, and 11, 12 groups, the groups that are just one out, or the groups that are just made it, and recheck your notes and say, you know what? Wow, I did comment a lot there that the timing was kind of rough with this group, but yet I still put them above this other one, and really go back. And that's where you would go back and check those numbers. Then, of course, when you get to a final situation, you're looking closely, not only the ranking of all the groups, but especially who you say is, this group represents, in my mind, the best group here today, or the group that should be the second best. And you really can have a definitive way. And it's okay to go ahead and take a lot of key notes of, okay, I think this one thing was the difference maker, and this second point was a difference maker. So trust your judgment, but keep notes and look very closely and scrutinize when you get to those key bubble areas of neighborhoods.
Yeah, well said. So we're excited for everybody to be out this weekend. We'll certainly be watching things. If there's anything you need support with obviously I'll stay online here if you want to ask a question. But if you need support getting into the weekend and documents and things like that, please feel free to ask. I'll clarify one thing as we're wrapping up, because I just had a question come across in the chat about holding the first 5 sheets. You can hold the first 5 sheets, like hold them, not turn them in, is what I mean, until you've done that. But remember, you can change any sheet at any point in the day up until they're running the last recap for, the final kind of sign off. Don't allow something, if you, as Mark was just saying, you're going back to your notes and you're like, oh man, I missed this. We have to do right by these kids. We have to do right by these directors. It's all about them. And as Dr. Kent said when we started, this is such an important day in the lives of these directors and these children. There is nothing embarrassing about calling back a sheet. In fact, if anything, I think it's a very valiant thing to say, like, hey, I that was the second band of the day. And even when I held my first 5, felt like I nailed it. But when I'm thinking back on the day, I need to move that group a little bit. But go ahead and talk with that area executive, make that change, make sure that you feel protected, make sure that you feel honored in that process, and make sure that we're honoring these kids who have worked so hard this season to bring this product to life. Because I really think that's our focus here, and we got to get it right by them. So without any other questions, we are dismissed. Thank you all for coming tonight. It was good seeing all of you. Have a great area Saturday. If you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out, and I'll stay right here if you have any questions for me. But thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.